The lock cost $4.89. I remember that because I stood in the checkout line, turning the package over in my hand, wondering whether I was being dramatic, whether I was about to make myself look paranoid over something small, whether adulthood was just a long series of moments where women were expected to tell themselves, no, no. It's easier if I pretend that didn't bother me. The lock was silver. Cheap. The kind sold near batteries and command hooks and blank key copies. Not dramatic enough to announce fear. Just solid enough to say, this closes now. I bought it on my way from my main job to my evening one, with my office shoes still pinching the backs of my heels and my lunch container unwashed in my tote. I nearly put it back twice, not because I thought I didn't deserve it, because I already knew what I would be buying. More than the lock itself, I would be buying comments, jokes. That thin office laughter people use when they want your embarrassment to perform as group bonding. At my daytime job, I handled referral files for a physical therapy clinic. It was all insurance codes, missed signatures, paperwork that made pain sound administrative. At my night job, 3 evenings a week and most Saturdays, I worked at a boutique cosmetics store in the ground floor of a shopping complex, where everything smelled faintly like citrus cleaner and money trying too hard. The store was pretty in a deliberate way. Glass shelves, soft lighting, neat rows of creams with impossible promises, girls in neutral lip color telling customers that hydration was self-respect. I did not dislike it. The job paid for practical things. My car insurance, my inhaler refills, the difference between getting ahead by $50 and falling behind by $100. Because I usually went straight from one job to the other, I changed in the back room. I kept a canvas bag in my assigned locker with black flats, a clean shirt, deodorant, a travel hairbrush, a little pouch of makeup, and a perfume atomizer my sister had given me after her first-year bonus. It wasn't expensive in the aspirational luxury sense, but it was mine, and it smelled like cedar and orange peel and the kind of steadiness I wanted my life to have. The employee area was small, and because it was small, everyone pretended the lack of privacy was charming. We brushed our hair in the same mirror, steamed our lunches in the same ancient microwave, heard each other's breakup calls and landlord calls and doctor calls, and got trained very quickly to act casual about it. There is a whole category of workplace intimacy that is not intimacy at all. It is just overcrowding in a friendlier font. My locker did not lock on its own. Most of them didn't. They latched, which is a generous word for a metal door that looked closed from a distance and could be pulled open by anyone with 2 fingers and a little curiosity. No one seemed bothered by that, or at least, no one said they were. I had worked there long enough to understand the cast. Talia overshared, Luz cried when she was angry, Marie always had almonds in her apron pocket, and Evan, who floated between stock duty and register coverage, was one of those men who treated every room like an audience he had not yet properly won. He wasn't aggressive in a way you could report cleanly. That was part of what made him exhausting. He was just always there, always joking, always commenting, always standing a little too comfortably inside the emotional perimeter of other people. He liked to tease women into becoming the uptight one in the conversation, and then act surprised when they didn't enjoy it. If someone pulled away, he turned it into a joke about how serious people were these days. If someone laughed along, he took it as a permit. For months, I dealt with him the way a lot of women deal with men who are not dangerous enough to trigger policy, but not respectful enough to feel safe around. I edited myself down, smiled small, moved sideways, stayed busy, made myself difficult to pin into conversation. That kind of management is work, though no one clocks you in for it. The week before I bought the lock, I came into the break room at the end of a shift and saw my locker hanging open. Not cracked, not loose. Open. My bag had tipped sideways. My clean shirt sleeve was draped over the lip like a tongue. My first feeling was not fear, just that hot, offended jolt you get when your private space looks touched. I stood there for a second, staring at it, trying to decide if I had left it like that by accident. I am suspicious of myself in exactly the way women are trained to be. Before I let myself feel wronged, I like to examine whether I have somehow earned the inconvenience. Maybe I hadn't shut it. Maybe the hinge had slipped. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was making meaning where there was none. Then I picked up my perfume atomizer. The cap was off. The nozzle was damp. That tiny detail made me feel strangely lonelier than if something valuable had gone missing. Because theft, at least, would have admitted itself. This was something softer and therefore harder to protest. Someone had not taken my thing. Someone had only used it. As if my belongings were a communal tray in a powder room. As if my ownership extended merely to purchasing and replacing them. I asked the room, mostly to the air, "Did somebody go into my locker?" Luz looked up first. Then Talia, with the expression of someone already anticipating a scene she hoped not to be included in. Marie said, "Oh, I think Shayna borrowed your perfume before break. She said she'd put it back." Borrowed. That was the word chosen for me. Not asked to use, not took without checking. Borrowed, as if consent were a technicality smoothed over by return. I said, "She opened my locker?" Marie shrugged in that apologetic retail way. "I guess. I thought you knew." Shayna wasn't there anymore. She had clocked out. The room did that thing groups do, when everyone senses that the correct moral response would cost social comfort, so they lean instead toward minimizing. It was only perfume. She probably didn't think you'd mind. We all kind of borrow each other's stuff sometimes. We did not all kind of borrow each other's stuff. What they meant was people with weaker boundaries were easier to borrow from. I wish I could say I made a firm speech. I wish I could say I looked everyone in the eye and said, "No one gets to open a closed space that belongs to me." Instead, I did what I had been trained by years of female workplace survival to do. I laughed once, without humor, and said, "Okay, well, I mind." Then I packed up and went home angry in that delayed, self-questioning way where the anger keeps getting interrupted by concern over whether your anger is socially proportionate. The whole drive, I kept hearing the word borrowed. Borrowed my perfume. Borrowed my space. Borrowed the assumption that I would rather swallow discomfort than make another adult feel briefly awkward. By morning, I had nearly convinced myself to let it go. Nothing was stolen. No one had threatened me. No one had even raised their voice. It was the sort of violation polite people are expected to round down. Then I imagined going to work that night, setting my bag back in that same locker, and having the back room remain open territory to anyone who felt entitled to a little convenience. That was when I stopped arguing with myself and bought the lock. The first person who noticed it was Talia. She laughed and said, "Ooh, very official." I smiled and said, "Yeah, I just want my stuff left alone." She nodded. Conversation over. Normal person reaction. Luz noticed later and said, "Honestly, smart." That room has no boundaries. Conversation over. Again, normal. Evan noticed 10 minutes into my shift and reacted like I had posted a manifesto. "What's this?" he said, tapping the lock with one finger. "You don't trust us now?" His tone was playful, but playful is often just plausible deniability with better posture. I was refolding tissue paper at the wrap station, so I kept my voice even and said, "Someone went into my locker last week, so now it locks." He gave a short laugh. "Damn, that's cold. We work together, Mara." I looked at him. "We do," I said, "which is exactly why nobody needs to be inside my bag." He raised both hands in mock surrender, grinned, and wandered back to the floor. If that had been the end of it, it would not be a story. It would just be a purchase. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of his fascination. He brought it up again at closing, in front of Shayna this time. "Careful," he said. "Mara thinks we're all criminals now." Shayna rolled her eyes and said, "Oh my God, is this about the perfume? I literally just used one spray. One spray." There it was. The tiny defense people make when they know they crossed a line but hope quantifying the trespass will make it vanish. As though disrespect can be measured in ounces, I said, "It's not about how much. It's about opening my locker without asking." Shayna looked inconvenienced rather than ashamed. Evan leaned against the counter like he was moderating a debate no one had requested. "See?" he said to the room. "This is what I mean. Hostile environment over one spray." That phrase was so ridiculous I almost laughed, but underneath the performance I felt something click into place. He was too invested. Much too invested. No one honest feels personally injured by someone else securing their own property. Annoyed. Maybe if they liked borrowing a charger. Embarrassed. If they had overstepped. But insulted? Only if the old arrangement had been serving them. After that, he turned the lock into a running bit. If I came in from my clinic job carrying my bag, he'd say, "Better secure the crown jewels." If I was clocking out, he'd ask whether the state secrets were safe. If another coworker needed a tampon or hair tie, he'd glance at my locker and say, "Guess generosity's been discontinued." Every line was delivered lightly enough that objecting would make me look humorless. That was the architecture of it. Not one offense large enough to justify escalation. Just enough repeated needling to pressure me back into being easy. Easy to access. Easy to tease. Easy to rearrange for someone else's comfort. What unnerved me most was how specifically the lock bothered him. He was not upset that someone had used my perfume. He had no interest in principle, in courtesy, in whether I felt violated. His only emotional energy appeared when the door between my things and everyone else's hands became real metal. Comments on the original thread kept saying some version of the same thing. He told on himself. That was exactly how it felt in real time. Not that I had caught him with proof in his pocket, but that his indignation was a brighter confession than evidence would have been. One Thursday, about 2 weeks after the lock appeared, I came into the break room to refill my water bottle and found Evan standing near my locker row, phone in hand, not doing anything that could be called wrong, just there. He looked up and smiled, that loose, innocent smile people wear when they want you to feel silly for noticing their positioning. "Forgot your key?" he asked. "No," I said. "Did you forget something in my locker?" The smile snapped off faster than I expected. Not completely. Just enough to show me that I had landed somewhere real. He laughed a beat too late. "You wish," he said, and walked past me into the hall. I stood there with my hand on the little silver lock and understood, all at once, why I had felt so tired since buying it. It was not the lock. It was the campaign against my right to need one. The push to make my boundary feel antisocial. The insistence that protecting myself required an apology. That night, I texted my sister while waiting for the bus. "Do you ever notice," I wrote, "that the people who say we're all family here are usually the ones most offended when you act like you own yourself?" She wrote back immediately. "That's because family is often code for harder to say no to." I screenshotted it and looked at it 3 times, not because it was revolutionary, because it named the pattern cleanly. Workplaces do this all the time. They flatten privacy into attitude. They recast access as warmth. They frame women who lock things, question things, or decline things as if we are refusing community, when usually we are just refusing unpaid surrender. I considered going to the manager earlier, but I kept postponing it for the same reason people postpone a lot of small necessary protections. I wanted one more piece of certainty, one more moment that would prove I was not overreading the dynamic, one more chance for him to stop. Instead, he escalated in the dumbest possible way. It was a Saturday, crowded and humid, with 3 bridal appointments on the books and a line for gift wrapping that wouldn't quit. Marie asked if anyone had ibuprofen because she could feel a migraine coming. Before I could answer, Evan said, "Ask Mara if she hasn't got it under maximum security." A few people laughed out of reflex, not cruelty, just that weak social instinct to smooth a room by pretending everything is a joke. I felt something in me settle rather than spike. No anger. "Just clarity," I said, plainly. "It's interesting how upset you are that you can't get into a locker that was never yours." The sentence landed harder than I expected. Shayna went still. Marie looked at him, then at me, as if recalculating an equation she had been given wrong. Evan's face changed in a way I will always remember, not because it became frightening, but because it lost its script. "I'm not upset," he said. "You're making this weird." "No," I said. "The weird part was people opening my stuff. The lock is normal." He muttered something about me being dramatic and disappeared to the stockroom. And because the whole exchange had happened in front of enough people, I no longer had to explain the pattern from scratch. They had heard the setup and the overreaction in one frame. They had finally seen how much emotional energy he had invested in a door that no longer opened for him. I spoke to the manager before close, not with tears, not with a speech, just facts. My locker had been opened. My belongings had been used. Since I added a lock, Evan had made repeated comments pressuring me about it in front of staff. I was done being handled as the problem for wanting privacy. The manager, who had been one of those floaty, avoidant leaders up to that point, actually looked embarrassed. Not at me, at the picture coming into focus. She asked for dates, examples, and whether anyone else had heard the remarks. I gave her what I had, which turned out to be enough. Talia confirmed some of it. Marie confirmed more. Even Shayna, who had every incentive to shrink the story, admitted she should never have touched my perfume and that Evan had definitely made the lock thing way bigger than it needed to be. That last sentence nearly made me smile. Because yes, that was the whole point. He had made it bigger. Not me. The original violation was small enough to be ignored. It was his outrage at losing access that turned the entire thing visible. After the conversation, he stopped speaking to me except when the job required it. I am supposed to tell you that this bothered me, and it did. A little, in the way any atmosphere shift does when you are tired and need the paycheck. But mostly it relieved me. Silence from someone who resented my boundary turned out to be far more peaceful than forced friendliness from someone who treated my discomfort like a game. A week later, I walked into the break room and noticed 2 new locks. One on Luz's locker, one on Talia's. Neither woman announced it. Neither woman made a statement. They just appeared, glimmering in the fluorescent light like tiny mechanical agreements. That moved me more than I expected. Because that is how dignity often returns, not in a dramatic triumph. Not in a perfect apology, just in the quiet normalization of something that should never have been controversial. A shut door. A private drawer. A bag no one opens because it is not theirs. I think about that a lot now whenever someone reacts to a simple boundary like it is a personal attack. People reveal themselves most clearly when they are denied a convenience they had mistaken for a right. If your trust depends on my unlocked access, what you wanted was never trust. It was permission without the burden of asking. The lock still hangs on my locker. It has scratches now. The metal is dulled where my thumb rubs it while I turn the combination. It is not pretty. It does not symbolize trauma. It symbolizes administration, a practical correction, a cheap piece of hardware purchased the day I stopped negotiating with my own discomfort. Sometimes customers come in wearing the perfume my sister bought me, and the scent reaches me in soft bursts over tissue paper and card receipts. Cedar, orange peel, something warm beneath it. I still carry it in my bag. I still use it sparingly. And every time I hear the click of the lock shutting, after I put it away, I feel an almost absurd amount of calm. Not because the world is safe, not because one petty man was the worst thing that could happen to me, but because I know exactly what that sound means. It means this is mine. It means no. It means a boundary does not become unkind just because somebody else enjoyed life more when it was missing.
Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, do me one favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops. Remember, nothing is ever just what it seems. See you on the next one.